Okay, so let's start session number 2. And we've got 2 speakers in this session. The first speaker is Ilkan Ken Ipecki with his speech, The Experiences of Queer Teachers in Turkey Within the Scope of Neoliberal School Policies and Institutionalized Heteronormativity. Okay, so we will make you the presenter, and now you can upload your presentation.
Good afternoon again to everyone. I'd like to start by thanking everyone who worked hard and made this conference possible in the first place. It's been quite a learning experience so far, and I hope my presentation could add something critical and valuable to our discussions later on. But before I delve into the facts and arguments of my presentation, I'd like to explain why I'm using an asterisk on the word queer throughout my presentation and paper. Although some theorists have claimed that the use of queer as an identity label is an oxymoron, over the last decades, we have seen once again our adamant urge to identify our positions within the flutter of genders and sexualities. Recognizing that queer has been widely used as an gender and sexual identity label, I make use of the term to refer to myriad configurations of sexual and gender identities, including LGBTQIA plus individuals, non-binary folks, as well as others who do not neatly fit into the categories of allosexuality and alloromanticism. With the use of the asterisk, I'm also paying an homage to Jack Halberstam's invention with the term trans with an asterisk on it, seeing potentially empowering potentialities in reclaiming and reappropriating a slur. Finally, this usage also allows me to differentiate the term from people who actually identify as queer, as well as helping me maintain a queer perspective on the volatility and the permeability of identities. Now that I somewhat explained the asterisks, I need to explain how this project came into being in the first place. The eye-opening experience occurred in 2012 when I met a former English teacher named Nedim Uzun, who used to work as a drag queen at a gay pub in Istanbul. He was 40 something at the time when we met him, and he told me all about how he was expelled from his school because of claimantly encouraging students into indecent acts. All the news wrote about it, and apparently the students themselves wanted to dress in drag. Years later, when I graduated, I experienced similar homophobic incidents myself at the school that I used to work, and there I got to meet other queer teachers who had similar experiences. So all of this let me wonder how a queer teacher manages to survive in a strictly heteronormative workplace. How we as queer teachers differ from each other in terms of our resilience and our reactions to homophobic incidents, and whether there might be other factors besides gender and sexuality that might affect the severity of the hardships we encounter. At this point, of course, one could easily ask how neoliberalism fits into all of this. Well, as many of us are already familiar with the tenets of globalized post capitalist societies, workers are always expected to separate their professional and sexual identities as rigidly as possible. But things are never as simple as some policymakers claim them to be. Sexual orientation and gender identity have long proved to be rather contested areas in terms of the tenability of the desired goal of the separation between professional and gender identities. However contested these two concepts are, they certainly have direct consequences on the lives of queer teachers who are not only treated as if they are invisible, but they also face the daily fear of being fired in case the word got out. Even though there is a growing literature that examines the experiences and the difficulties of queer teachers, this particular piece is the first one that is conducted in a country such as Turkey, where queer individuals are not protected by laws, at least explicitly. The odds of having an out queer teacher at public school is particularly impossible in Turkey. At least we don't know any incident or any known case so far. So what about the studies in Turkey that are conducted in this particular research topic? Uh, my brief literature review revealed that the studies that are conducted so far only focused at the beliefs and attitudes and expectations of teachers and students who identify as cisgender and heterosexuals. So in Turkey, we are still in the dark about the lives of queer teachers. But thankfully, because of Catherine Connell's seminal ethnography, we know that gay and lesbian teachers are known to live under a constant burden of maintaining a balance between their sexual and professional identities. And they usually act out in three different ways. They either manage to find the means to split their so-called conflicted identities, or they manage to create ways of knitting those conflicted identities into a harmonious one, or as the last option out, they simply leave teaching, which is the common outcome in Turkey. So in this paper, following these trajectories that I mentioned before, laid by the previous literature, I investigate what kind of experiences queer teachers in Turkey articulate regarding the conundrum of being forced into express a non-sexualized and a non-gendered outlet, especially when there is a pressing supposition out there which claims that cisgender heterosexuality is the norm. Having interviewed 6 queer teachers in Turkey, I questioned how they deal with the institutionalized norms and rules of compulsory heterosexuality. I present that these teachers are both encumbered by the aesthetic labor that they are expected to perform, borrowing a concept from Hochschild, and they are challenged by inequality regimes that are fortified by institutionalized heteronormativity at their workplace. As you can see, these are some of the seminal studies conducted in the field, but there are still very few. So the fact that neoliberal dynamics were situated at the center of the difficulties of my participants' experience is evident in the excerpts that I provide from my in-depth interviews. These testimonies reveal that schools, which are always private managements in the case of queer teachers in Turkey, these schools always want to maximize their profit and attract more customers as much as possible. This is ensured for cases in which a queer teacher is employed against all odds by forcing the teachers to engage in what Hochschild called deep acting. So the school administration expect the teacher to look, act, and behave normal, read cisgender heterosexual. As it is seen from my in-depth interviews, gender expression is a frequently disputed topic of queer teachers' employment procedure. For example, one of my interlocutors, Marriage, stated the following regarding gender expression and how it fits into his experiences of being employed when he's first interviewed by school administration. He says, "You know, the way I speak has always been feminine. Since childhood, it has been one of my greatest problems. When I interviewed for this job, for instance, the principal first asked me if I were sick because my voice sounded strange. After realizing that this is how I talk, he told me that I need to have a profound tone or else students would not respect me." So this is my rough translation. So Marriage talked about this incident in a very negative manner because he said that this also is a very frequent thing for his when he applied to other jobs. And from this excerpt, we see that schools might really have a hidden curriculum of teaching gender conformity and heteronormative morality, as William suggests. As for the variations between the reactions of different queer teachers, class has comfort as a vital criterion for the benefits and advantages it provides someone. In the example of Erdem, who's a 30-year-old English teacher, for instance, who works at a private school in a rich developed area of Istanbul, also known as Şişli, we see that as a Gale May teacher, he has the physical capital that allows him to live in an area where he does not experience direct homophobia in his neighborhood. Coming from a family with high cultural capital, he explained that he knew that being gay was not something bad, but he also underlined that other people did not really know about it. Though he is not out at his workplace, he said that they will support him in the face of a negative event, as he has seen it when another queer teacher at his workplace had an incident with a parent. But Mertan's story is a completely different one. As he was working in an underdeveloped and rather conservative area of Istanbul known as Sarıgazi, he got expelled. He was tricked into sending his Facebook photo by a student of his, and this student exposed him, and this event got him expelled, and he stated that he still cannot recover from this event, how humiliating it was for him, and the way other teachers and school administration handled it. This difference between these two narratives, I think, point at the fact that class-related characteristics of regions, schools, school administration, parents, teachers, and students are important determinants of the level of homophobic attitudes and behaviors one encounters in their workplace. This finding is also supported by scholars such as Catherine Connell and Olivia Marie, as physical, social, and cultural capital might allow someone the tools to be able to split their conflicting identities in case it is needed. Unfortunately, the limited number of in-depth interviews in this study and my 8 years of in-field experience as an elementary level of English teaching, they show that queer teachers in Turkey usually end up in two different scenarios. They either continue struggling under strictly heteronormative school systems and school cultures, or they quit. And it shouldn't come as a surprise in a culture where a teacher's gender identity or sexual orientation is publicly and sometimes collectively regarded as something shameful or even dangerous. So queer teachers at the moment are left with an ultimatum of take it or leave it policy. As I conclude my presentation, I like to address the title of the conference and use this as an opportunity to question who is really invisible in our contemporary heteropatriarchal societies. Those who are constantly sanctioned and feared and are called to question why they desire who they desire, or what it means to be a woman or a man, or those whose desire is a culturally given, whose sexual and gender identity is unmarked, who is rarely prompted to question why they desire who they desire, or how they know that they're a man or a woman. In this case, it is true that in countries like Turkey, where queer individuals are not protected against homophobic attitudes and discrimination by laws, if not all queers, they are treated like apparitions, phantoms that are not concretely present or humane enough to be heard or accounted for. On the other side of the coin, it is equally true that these apparitions and their unnatural presence are the menacing terrors that haunt the white cishet colonizers. It is these ghastly specters that I believe have a true potential to threaten and undermine the legitimacy of the institutionalized heteronormativity that keeps hurting many, including queer teachers in Turkey. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening. Thanks for your patience.
Let's move on to the next speaker, and then we'll have 30 minutes for the discussion. Another speaker is Dr. Natalia Juchniewicz with her speech presentation, Invisible Values and Norms in the Design of Non-places. So you've got your own 15 minutes.
Okay, my topic is invisible values and norms in the design of non-places, and my perspective is a perspective of a philosopher of technology, philosopher, social philosopher, and also a sociologist. And I will try to show you how complicated aspects we should have into account when we discuss about public spaces, public places, and especially non-places as a very specific, very organized and controlled fragments of our place and space. But at the beginning, I will start with the definition. So from anthropological point of view, we perceive place as something which has territoriality or historical locality. Usually it is something with what we perceive as having a meaning, value, significance, also a feeling of belonging. Quite often, if we ask people about that, what the important place for you is, they are answering that this is my home. This is something connected with our roots. Space, on the other hand, is usually perceived as something which is around us, and especially thanks to modernity, all different architectural changes in the modern times, we started to perceive space as a practiced place. This is, of course, the definition of Dessertot. And modern, I mean, nowadays, we can say that spaces themselves derive from a combination of new technologies, rationalized organizations, and settlement recomposition imposed by economic changes. Postmodernity, therefore, produced nomadic spaces, and we observe the transition from a sedentary to a nomadic world. So, of course, this aspect of nomadism, the fact that we are constantly changing different places. Sometimes this is because we want, sometimes because we are forced to do this, is an important aspect also for our thinking about space and place. And in the supermodernity or postmodernity, we discovered or we observed that there is also something which is in between place and space, which we can name non-place. Of course, I'm pretty sure that you all know what non-place is. But from the definition of Marc Auger, we can say that supermodernity produces non-places, meaning spaces which are not themselves anthropological places and which do not integrate the aerial places. Instead, they are listed, classified, promoted to the status of places of memory and assigned to circumscribed and specific position. And one more, supermodernity, which stems simultaneously from three figures of excess: overabundancy of events, spatial overabundancy, and the individualization of references, naturally finds its full expression in non-places. And to sum up, non-places, of course, are all of these places which are connected, for example, with transport systems. So, of course, bus stops, airports, railway stations are a good example of non-places. Also, hospitals, supermarkets, sometimes even parks can be treated as this kind of places without any concrete meaning in a sense of anthropological meaning, but they are just the places where we should do something, where we should be because we have a goal, and shortly after fulfill our goals, we should rather escape the space. This is highly connected with the problem of power and control. And when we discuss the public spaces and places, we speak about social control in five meanings. Presence. Presence means that people have access to a place and a right to be there. Use and action are connected with a particular activity that is possible when we occupy different places. Appropriation gives a person or community a feeling of property. This is an either weaker or stronger bond with a place, and it can be temporary or permanent. Modification means that users can change the space on the level of its design or embedded technologies. And disposition is linked with the feeling of ownership that can be transferred to other people. However, when we discuss the problem of design and all of this social control defined above by Francis, we see that design of non-places is not something really giving people this feeling of social control. It is rather something contrary, because design of non-places, as states the finalist, is rather associated with something which is named hostile architecture, evil architecture, excluding architecture, because of different solutions that are implemented to these places exactly to steer and control human behavior. And this is also possible because of new technologies and the fact that a constant surveillance of our behavior can be algorithmized, or we can just apply different algorithms to our behavior, because people usually have different habits, and this is obvious that we move from one space to another, from one place to another in a concrete way. And this is quite easy to discover the paths which we take. So of course, this is also very important information for different designers, how to predict human behavior in such places as non-places. And important thing is that in a common discussion about, general discussion about non-places, we usually have these two perspectives. So we usually speak about negative and positive aspects of non-places. On the negative side, we have the fact that they are perceived as placeness, that we have this control just mentioned by me, that there are no events in non-places. This is any space, whatever. On a positive side, we try to see that these places are sometimes hospitable and open. Sometimes they can have value for different small cities or villages, which is not so obvious from the point of view of big cities. But anyway, this discussion is usually divided on this just perspective of negative and positive aspects. What is interesting for me in this discussion is to apply post-phenomenology of technology, so the field of research focused on human-technology relations and its value for design studies. And this theory was created, or let's say that the first summary of the main assumptions were created by Don Idey. And this was focused on 4 aspects, 4 relations which we have with technology: embodiment, hermeneutics, alterity, and background. I will in a moment very quickly explain what are the aspects of embodiment, hermeneutics, and alterity. So this is my main interest in this paper. And now very shortly tell you what the background is. The background means that we usually do not pay attention on that what's going on around us, whereas we have lots of different technological implementations which also take part in steering our behavior. I'm not interested in this concrete relation in this paper because this is a huge topic, definitely too wide for a short presentation and should be analyzed separately. That is why I will focus on that aspects of post-phenomenology and design, which are maybe less obvious. And also, I am going to apply Peter Paul Verbeek's analysis of that, what role different things and objects take in the morality, and what does it mean that we can apply to design more ethical perspective. And he says that we have to think about, first of all, that the designers try to predict all the different ways things can be used, also the undesirable ones. And the second perspective is that the designers try to build morality into artifacts. And what is interesting for me from the point of view of non-places and design and in this case, embodiment relation. Don Heidi says that the technology withdraws, as Heidegger says, it becomes quasi-transparent, as I say, and thus the technology here is not object-like, it is a means of experience, not an object of experience in use. What does it mean? Usually in post-phenomenology, we perceive that embodiment means that I have to embody technology, so technology adjusts to my body. Because if I want, for example, to drive a car perfectly, I have to be a hybrid with my car. I have to, after some practice, I can even feel my car through my body. Or if, for example, if I practice an archery, to be a good archer, I have to embody arc to my own body. So I am a one hybrid with an arc, and only after this kind of embodiment, this object starts to be something transparent for me, something just so obvious that I don't focus my attention on that. However, with the case of non-places and its design, it's a little bit problematic, because if we look, for example, on this kind of implementations to our non-places, this is very difficult to say that I can embody this kind of bench. As you see, this kind of bench is made of stone, so the material which is not very comfortable for our body. This is made as uneven surface, so it has an uneven surface, and this is something really just created in advance, in a sense that we want to give a message to people that you cannot lie on this bench, you cannot sit here for a very long time. This is exactly the example of that. We want to regulate your behavior, and we don't want you to feel comfortable. We don't want you to embody this kind of implementation, because we want to steer your behavior through this bench. And of course, there are lots of examples of evil architecture. For example, different spikes, which you probably can observe in the area of almost all railway stations and airports, which make a space impossible to be, let's say, inhabited by homeless people. So lots of sometimes very small implementations that really regulate our behavior, very often in a very invisible way for us as users of different spaces. So in case of these benches, I name this kind of implementation rather a dist embodiment. And this is an example of an implementation which exactly says that you have to in fact adjust your body to this bench, not this thing would be adjusted to your body. And the second case is alterity. Don Heidi says that there are some technologies, there are some implementations, some things which are just curious, and we are interesting and we want to know them. And this is very often a case of different technologies, because we are just interested in how they work, what we can do. It's about the example of a child's toy, a child's top, that this is so interesting that we can do something with such a simple object, and we are just curious about how it works. And this kind of very vivid, very sincere interest is perceived as something positive, in a sense that we want to know how it works. We want to learn how to use it. We want to stimulate our curiosity. However, again, in the case of non-places, Alterity in the design of non-places can be understood as, first of all, technological solutions that assist people in identifying where they are and how to find what they are looking for. So, of course, tables, screens, maps, signs, etc. And also, we can maybe perceive alterity as interactions with the other in the form of a stranger. However, what is important here is that those situations, those technologies, those implementations are not alter, in a sense that this is not alterity that stimulates us to something new, because in fact the scripts of use in different non-places of different technologies are the same. And in fact, this is something also what we expect as users. We want to know if you know how you should behave being in airport, you expect the same scripts of your behavior in each cases. So this is, of course, something, again, contradictory to the assumption that alterity is something what we really expect from different technologies. And the last one in this presentation is the relation of hermeneutics. And Donati says that hermeneutics is, in fact, the interpretation of our world through technologies, in the sense that when we take a microscope or a telescope and we just look through this object, we can discover a completely new world, something which is not visible, not perceived by us, just using our naked eye or just our body. We using this kind of technologies can just broaden our knowledge, broaden our interpretation of the universe, world, ourselves, etc. So idea says that we give a voice to things, in a sense that they really speak to us more or less directly, of course, through science and design and different technological solutions. However, again, when we are thinking about the design of non-places and we are asking the question, okay, what really we can know from the message of different technologies used there, it is rather, do not occupy me for too long, or young people, you don't want to gather here. This kind of messages are rather messages with a very strong feeling of exclusion, in a sense that we want, for example, by this kind of bench, which I explained, you see that we send a message through objects that homeless people are not welcome, young people are not welcome, skaters are not welcome, but also very often children, women, elderly people, minorities are not welcome. And this is, of course, a little bit problematic if we have in mind the fact that non-places are these quasi-places between something private and public, between a place and space. And in fact, our access to different spaces and places is not so obvious. And for example, Fitzgerald and Robertson, sorry for the mistake, they say that exclusion could sometimes also mean that someone's identity becomes limited to being the occupant of the seat number indicated on the ticket or boarding pass, which is at the same time the confirmation of the good moral intentions and innocence. So we sometimes feel feel well with this fact that, okay, now this is the moment when I can be just a tourist and just forget about all of the other social roles which I have. But sometimes it can be also problematic, because if you don't look as someone who could possibly occupy the seat, for example, in a waiting room at the railway station, some guards or police can just check if you can confirm that you are sitting here as someone innocent because, for example, you have a ticket. So this kind of very, in my opinion, minor, very invisible social relations and invisible social aspects of design are very interesting and very sensitive on power and control. There are two-dimensional morality of things, because on the one hand we can say, okay, but different design solutions are also positive, as for example blue light used by Japanese Keihin railway station, because it prevents suicide. So if we, for example, in advance think about the statistics of suicides in our society, we can predict humans' behavior, and just to protect them, even if they are unconscious about this protection. We can regulate where people can express themselves artistically. It turns our interest towards places which are designed specifically to fulfill the needs of various social groups, as for example, you can see on this picture, skate parks, which probably when skaters can use skate parks, it's much safer for them in comparison to use all of the other not well-equipped places. And so the invisible design of non-places has no only positive or negative role, because we also have to think about that, how we create our spaces and places in a sense that we are responsible also for that what is around us. And really to conclude, the post-phenomenological relations such as embodiment, alterity, or hermeneutics reveal the contradiction between the theory and practice. In a sense that these relations in theory indicate the invisibility of the artifact and use the curiosity in its alterity and giving the artifact a voice. However, in practice, non-place artifacts are rather visible, and yeah, the hostile design is something absolutely visible. Unsurprising, because we do not expect surprising situations in non-places. We rather expect something very, very stable, very, very concrete. And issuing comments than having a voice. What is invisible here are usually values and norms delegated to them or expressed by them, in a sense that values are not purely human, in a sense that things are not neutral. So they have an inbuilt morality, they shape human behavior, they take part in the social control as well. Description of the design of non-places should focus more on the critical and normative aspects of steering human behavior, and less on aesthetic and economic dimension of their implementation. And in the quantified algorithmic culture, there still should be the chance for qualitative perception of space, which is unfortunately very rarely raised as a problem. So thank you very much. If you are interested, I recommend you the whole book about past phenomenology and architecture, which should be published very soon this year. Thank you.
Both of you have introduced new perspectives, new ways of seeing, like many things, and I've got my own kind of questions and reflections, but if there are questions from the conference participants, then let's have them first, okay? What was interesting about like the two presentations is the fact that like you discussed two completely different like areas. However, they can be both linked together, put together with this neoliberal kind of logic standing behind the education system and the way non-places are designed, like in contemporary world. because like going back to the first presentation, what was interesting to hear was the fact that the success of the teacher's job was somehow connected with or depends on the heteronormative and cisgender traits. So like neoliberalism is all about professionalism and success. You can be successful, you can be a successful teacher if you follow some script, like script following some kind of traditional lines of success. So teachers who don't really speak in a manly voice, who are kind of biologically male, they might have difficulties achieving this kind of success, understood in a very conservative way, so it's in a way making people adapt to very conservative, traditional ways of going for success. And yeah, and when it comes to the second presentation, there is this neoliberal logic like lurking in all the non-places, in the sense that they are made for business. Like people go there to do their business, to do some task, to not really to socialize, not really to get together, but to do some business, to do some task, to achieve some goal, and then they can go in their own directions. So it's like keeping people apart, making sure that they do their business and go away in their own directions. So it's like against togetherness, against the sense of commonness and in a way solidarity. Like, of course, it's kind of one of many interpretations, but if the places are to be successful, then they have to, the kind of the social control has to be imposed, and imposed in such a way so that people do not really enjoy the places, but rather they have to do some task, do some business, and disperse. Okay, so let's move back to the questions. Sorry for my diversion. And, okay, so I'm reading now the questions. So I think the use of draft wind in public places to remove homeless is super interesting in contemporary architecture. Is it possible to out these volunteer humanist design intentions and apply queer shaming tactics to challenge them? Maybe as academics and activists invested in spatial justice. Okay, so maybe let's have put on the speakers, and they can they see the questions, the reflections, so it will be easier and quicker if they kind of have their own voice. So I've got a question, actually.
Yeah, sure.
I was like listening to you, I was wondering if there are any strategies that queer teachers use to be successful and but still to kind of keep their own identity, not really following the neoliberal logic of adaptation. Yeah.
I mean, out of my interlocutors, my participants, none of them were working as an English teacher at that moment, so they all quit, except one. And the way Mertan actually managed that Erdem managed that was he hid his sexual identity, which was not a problem for him because he got to be himself around his friends and in his neighborhood. But apart from that, especially right now in Turkey, it's almost impossible to be out and successful as a teacher, not just as an English teacher, because the government and Ministry of Education doesn't allow for someone to have an out gender or sexual identity aside from being heterosexual or cisgender, because that is regarded as the moral and the right one. So they usually quit and they move into other careers, such as being translators or tutoring or providing private lessons to others who are in need, or they work in private schools, which are also enforcing similar rules, but they are more tolerant compared to public schools, of course.
Okay, and what about other professions? Do they also keep this rigor of heteronormativity? Like I mean, some more some creative professions, like in Turkey. Are there any spaces, like professional spaces, which allows for such queering practices to go on and to function like unharmed, if I can use kind of such a word?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Actually, it depends, and it's also quite similar to what's going on around the world, especially with new media and new forms of popular culture. The thing is that, for example, if you're a fashion designer or you're someone popular, an influencer, it's okay to be to have your gender expressions in non-conforming manners. For example, we have a lot of TV shows in Turkey, and most of the presenters, jurors are apparently queer people, but no one is rather affected by their presence. But for example, if you are in a blue collar industry, or if you're a white collar worker, that might cause some problems. There are some great works from notable NGOs from Turkey. For example, one is called Spot. They publish yearly policies and reports regarding how white collars queer workers in Turkey manage and how they survive, or what kind of difficulties they encounter in their workplace. But usually this whole heteronormative system and how it undermines professionality and foregrounds one's gender and sexual identity as a deficit or even a barrier to their work is very much common in many areas. But again, as I said, some areas of professions are rather free, like fashion, pop culture, music industry. And again, even in those, it is unlikely for someone to come out as a queer person or a gender non-conforming person and have a successful career in Turkey. Although we have examples outside the world that who have successful careers.
Okay, thank you. You've got 2 comments on your presentation.
Okay. I was wondering whether there are alternative forms of education that promote queer subjectivities. Yes, that is actually one of the areas that is being currently studied, and it definitely needs further work. But sadly, these new works are being conducted abroad, outside of Turkey, mostly in Canada and United States, because these are the places where we can actually talk about how to promote queer subjectivities and educate young minds how to be less discriminative and less homophobic and etc. But yeah, there are some ways and models. And to be fair, I think some schools are trying to implement anti-discriminative policies and uh, educational curricula. But again, that is very much controlled by school administration, principals, and other teachers. I hope that answers the first question. As for the second question, tone of voice discrimination. There are studies about a similar discrimination directed at women politicians. Yeah, I mean, as for the second question, usually homophobia and queer discrimination has its roots from misogyny or our inclination as society to find feminine attribute as something decorative or secondary. A very good example of this can be found in Roscoe's ethnography, Dude Your Effect. I would really recommend that book to anyone who's interested in these kind of issues. There, she wrote that the word fact is not actually directed against LGBTQ people or queers, but it is just a derogative slur that encapsulates anything that is associated with femininity, which is seen as something lesser in value. So yeah, I agree that the tone of voice has something to do with our values and beliefs about femininity being in secondary value according to our heteronormative misogynistic society. It also has its roots in our phallogocentric idea. So if the voice is rough or it is less feminine, we think that it has more loyal, trustworthy characteristics. These are all coming from our misogynistic background and norms and rules about it. But it also applies to being queer. But if you are a gender conforming queer, yeah, I think that wouldn't be a problem as long as you are not out. I hope that also answers the second question.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for your answers. So now let's switch to Dr. Natalia Juchniewicz.
Thank you.
And a microphone. Okay, so thank you for all of these comments. They are very inspiring. I have the whole page of written notes, and this is probably impossible for me now to answer all of your comments and all of your questions. I will just maybe try to sum up them. First of all, yes, totally agree with Rafał Majka that this is connected with neoliberalism, and of course. First of all, Auger was criticized by different anthropologists that his perspective is focused only on business and people who have an ability to be in mobility because he just focused on high class in France, and of course he was just interested in this new phenomena connected with mobility of high classes. And generally, this logic of business, the fact that we should not socialize these places, that they are against togetherness. This is also connected with some aesthetic aspect of non-places, because if we think, what's the role of non-places in the urban areas? It is always connected with transport, with health, with education. So all of these aspects which were mentioned by Michel Foucault as the source for power and control. So of course, if we just try to ask the question, okay, what was in the interest of Michel Foucault and where are the non-places nowadays? We see that this is the same list of places, the same list of problems. So it is also connected with with something named by Foucault as a splendor of power, a splendor of the control, connected with the fact that we want to make the spaces clean, health, aesthetic, safety, controllable, and so on. So of course, all of these aspects are connected with, on the one hand, discourse of power, on the other hand, this very individualistic discourse of neoliberalism. And anyway, this is also connected with sometimes the property. I mean that not all of the non-places are public from the point of view of property, but they are not only just private, in a sense that that this is sometimes in between, also from a legal point of view. And all of these comments by Alex Lubiński. So thank you so much for all of your comments. They are very interesting. And first of all, the problem of affordancy. I agree that, of course, if we see that people change the way how different design solutions were, the way of the idea for them. I mean that when we see that people change the way of their behavior and use, this is, of course, an example of intrinsic values and possible affordances not predictable by designers. But I'm not sure if we can say this about the whole non-place. I mean that this would mean that we have in advance a vision, a very concrete vision of the possible use of different places. But when we start to analyze it, we see that this is more complicated, because sometimes sitting in a waiting room can be a form of rest, can be a form of relax, can be to a place for to find a safe space and just to protect him or herself. So this is, I'm not sure if we can say about the affordances of the whole place, I mean the whole building. But of course, different solutions, yes, theory of Gibson, of course, can be applied to this. I rather prefer theory of Wiebe Baker, the Netherlands philosopher of technology, who said that when we have different technological solutions, the technological solutions, different objects, we are talking about the flexibility of their meaning, and we can see that there are different social groups which negotiate the extent of this meaning and the form which concrete design solution will finally take. And this is interesting, that usually in a case of non-places, we do not have this possibility to take part in the discussion, okay, so what kind of solutions we want. And this is something I think interesting, because when we talk about different public spaces, and we are inhabitants of some area, some city, we have some possibility to take part in the discussion about different solutions in public spaces. But usually in case of non-places, nobody asks us. We just have designers, engineers, and the final product. And this is something non-negotiable. Of course, people can use different concrete elements differently, but and in this sense, that would be close to the Wiebe Baker's theory. But I'm not sure if you can name the whole non-place as having a kind of concrete affordancy that just that we can just discover or change. And when we say that when we discover that some non-places have intrinsic value, and when we see this value, it stopped to be a non-place. I think this is too easy, because then there is a question, okay, so what kind of place it is? If it is a bench or if it is a bus stop in a village, totally agree that this is something much more than just a bus stop in comparison to the bus stops in the city. But it is still a bus stop in a sense that it still has a definition. It still suits to the definition of a non-place. But the role of this non-place is much wider, and not only negative one or not only neutral one, because people just gather there, just use a bus stop for lots of the possible uses. I don't know, they are drinking alcohol, they are playing there, they are gathering, this is a kind of shelter when it is raining. So lots of possibilities, probably not intended by designers, but it's still a non-place from terminological point of view. So I think rather that this is interesting that and this is something what exactly Auger said, that we produce in postmodernity or supermodernity this kind of places which are in between. And I think this is interesting that we discovered this space between, and this is not so important to say that no, this is closer to a private sphere or this is closer to a public sphere, rather to see what's going on inside of these spaces, or in these non-places, because non-places, it is also, for example, a camp for refugees. It is also a non-place, but the role of this non-place can be a completely different in that what we imagine using, I don't know, a railway station on a bus stop or a bus stop. So, or for example, when the railway station is occupied by refugees, as it was, I think, in oh my God, in Vienna. This is an English, or Wien, Vienna. This is an English name of Wiedeń. This railway station started to be inhabited because people had no other shelter, and they were waiting for something that should happen, but the time was just unpredictable. So again, it was something, in between. The situation in a non-place could have been named that this is a situation of a homo sacer from a point of view of Agamben. And of course, when we are sitting at the railway station, we do not think about ourselves that, okay, I'm maybe a homo sacer, or a homeless person is a homo sacer. So someone who, well, we don't want to harm him, but we don't want him in this place at the same time. So we do not help him, but don't harm him. And this is something a little bit confusing and complicated. And also, I think when we talk about the visible and invisible aspects of our social interactions, non-places are just a perfect laboratory of all of these interactions. Well, I love Goffman, and so of course all of these very small interactions between humans are very, very interesting, and they need to be analyzed in a detailed way. But this is still in between, and I think this is the value and strength of this non-places, that they can show us something in a more strict and more concrete way. Okay, I'm talking almost 10 minutes, so I will stop.
Okay, so do we have any other questions? Okay, Mr. Ipecki is writing something, so we have to be finishing soon. Okay, thank you everyone for your great questions. So thank you both for your inspiring speeches. which had the common theme. We are meeting in an hour because now we are taking a lunch break. See you in an hour.